Howdy folks, and welcome back to the patch 9.3 test server with the mighty Jingles. Today we're going to be looking at one of the new light tanks that have been introduced to the game, the Spypanzer RU251, or as I like to call it, the Spypanzer. But first, something that I really should have mentioned in a previous video, they've redesigned the interface. You may have not noticed it, it is quite subtle, but if you have a look at the top of the screen here, the interface bar has changed, and what they appear to be doing is just standardizing their hangar interface between all three wargaming games, World of Tanks, World of Warplanes, and the upcoming World of Warships. So up here you have your settings menu, and then you have your player record with instant pop-up stats available there, and then you can go straight to your service record. Your premium button up here where you can extend your premium time. The Create Platoon interface has been overhauled. It automatically pops up your friends list, so you can see, oh, Quickie Baby's online, gathering material for tank reviews. And there's the new Platoon interface, which is quite neat. Yes, I do want to leave the platoon, thank you. The battle button obviously hasn't changed, takes you straight into battle. Select which game mode you wish to use. From here, clicking this button will immediately take you to the Wargaming website where you can buy gold. There's your gold exchange for credits button, and up here is your free experience conversion button. The changes to the interface also extend. Here's the research button for whichever tank you currently have selected. In my case, I have the Spypanzer RU251, the Spypanzer. So without further ado, that was a quick look at the changes to the game interface. Let's get on with having a look at this brand new Tier 8 German light tank. A couple of interesting things about this tank, not least of which is where it sits in the tech tree. At Tier 8, and there it is, the RU251. Comes from the Aufklärungspanzer Panther, but interestingly leads to the Leopard prototype, so it's an alternative route. If you've gone down the German light tank line, it's now an alternative route to getting to the top tier German mediums in the Leopard line. So from here you can go to the Leopard prototype and then onto the Leopard, bypassing the Indian Panzer, bypassing the VK3002D, the VK3001, and the Panzer III-4. So if light tanks are your thing, but you like fast-moving, lightly armoured, hard-hitting German mediums, then this is an alternative route to get to those tanks as well. Actually, while we're here, let's have a look at the research path of this tank. There's not an awful lot to research on it. It only has one gun, it only has one turret, there's one radio, two engines, and the tracks. The top engine does not actually give you that much more bang for your buck than the intermediate engine. The stock engine is 500 horsepower. You go up to the intermediate engine, you get a whopping extra 100 horsepower. You go to the top engine, and it's only a 30 horsepower increase. You're going to want it, of course, because, well, you have to unlock that engine to get to the Leopard prototype. But all three engines only have a 12% chance of bursting into flames when the engine gets hit, so, that's good. The tank has 1200 hit points, which is about standard for the Tier 8 light tanks. The AMX 1390, for example, has 1100. The T54 lightweight also has 1200, and the T49 has 1100 as well. It's a very, very light tank. It only weighs 25.83 tons with my equipment configuration, of a maximum load limit on the top suspension of 28 tons. And that very, very lightweight machine, with its 630 horsepower engine, means it has a pretty impressive power-to-weight ratio of 24.39. Now, while that's nowhere near the ridiculous power-to-weight ratio of a tank like the ELC AMX, which has 35.66, but the ELC Special, compare it to the AMX 1390, which is not a slow tank. It has a power-to-weight ratio of 23.11, so the Spypanzer actually has a better power-to-weight ratio. And it turns faster as well, 44 degrees per second. It's not the most nimble of the new Tier 8 lights, but it's much more manoeuvrable and faster than a tank like the AMX 1390. Top speed of 80 kilometers per hour. Now in practice you're rarely going to actually see that top speed, but it's not unusual for this thing, in a straight line, to beat 70 kilometers per hour. This is a quick little tank. Of course, all that speed and power comes at a price. This thing has absolutely no armour whatsoever. The single thickest armour on this tank is the 25mm of hull armour at the front. The armour is terrible, absolutely hopeless. 25 at the front, 20 at the sides, 8 at the rear. The turret's 20 all round. It's just terrible, terrible armour, but it's a very low profile machine. Your biggest defence in this thing is going to be staying low, staying fast, staying mobile, and using your view range to snipe without being spotted. It has a 400 metre view range as well. And the turret also turns very, well, relatively quickly. I mean, comparing against other light tanks, obviously it's a fast turning turret compared to heavies and mediums, 44 degrees per second. But if you were to look at tanks like the T-54 lightweight, turret turns at 48 degrees per second, the LTTB 48 degrees per second. Have a look at some of the Americans, the T-37, the same, 44, the Walker Bulldog, 50 degrees per second. The Walker Bulldog is a real dogfighting scrapper of a tank. And the T-49, again, 44. So, fairly standard close-in dogfighting capability compared to the other new light tanks. Speaking of close-in dogfighting capability, we of course have to talk about the gun. Only one gun available on this tank, but it's pretty good. It's a 90mm Rheinmetall DM1. It has almost 10 rounds per minute rate of fire, 190mm of penetration, 240 average damage, reasonable accuracy, 0.36, and pretty good aiming time, 2.1 seconds. The ammunition choices are unsurprising. It's bog standard armour piercing, high explosive anti-tank, which is the premium ammunition, or high explosive. With the high explosive anti-tank ammo, you get 250mm of penetration. And the high explosive ammunition isn't bad either. The high explosive ammo has 102mm of penetration and does 320 average damage. So it's a capable, solid, reliable, nothing spectacular, but certainly not a bad gun. And it seems to work really well on this little tank, as we're going to see from the following replay. Actually, before we get stuck into a battle, I jumped into a training room just to have a look at the gun depression. It's not bad. I think that's about 5 degrees of gun depression out to the front, which isn't great, but it's certainly not terrible. Not terrible. Have a look at the LTTB. Now, the gun depression to the side, on the other hand, is significantly better. I don't know exactly what that is, but I've heard figures like 10 degrees bandied around, and that is pretty impressive. But on to an actual battle. Now, there's a couple of things you have to bear in mind when you're trying to look at a tank on the test server. It's a very, very artificial environment. You're never going to get the kind of matchmaking on the live server that you get on the test server. There's a lot of team killing goes on the test server, much more so than on the live server. And everybody's firing gold ammunition and using premium consumables on the test server. However, I'm testing a tank that only has 25mm of armour at the most, so it doesn't really matter what kind of ammunition people are firing at me. It makes it very difficult when you're trying to get a feel for how a heavy tank, for example, a new heavy tank, is going to perform. Test server battles, you're getting gold fired at you left, right and centre. It's very, very difficult to judge how good the armour is on a new tank, but when the tank doesn't have any armour in the first place, it's completely irrelevant. Fire your gold at me, bro, I don't really care. I'd be more concerned if people were firing high explosive at me, because with 25mm of armour at the most, high explosive shells are going to penetrate and do full damage to this tank, so that's going to be a significant problem. If people spot you early enough and switch ammunition early enough, getting hit with high explosive is going to absolutely wreck this tank. And because it's such a small tank, and the modules on the tank are packed so closely together, I get the impression that this thing does take a lot of module and crew damage, more so than mediums or heavies, for example. You'll note I am not firing premium ammunition. I want to get an idea for how this tank will do in a real live server environment, and it seems to do pretty well. And of course, this is what you need to know as well. Anybody can do well spamming gold ammunition and using gold consumables, but how's the thing actually going to perform when you get your hands on it? And you're not spending the national debt of Nigeria on it to run it in any given random battle on the live server. The good news is, yeah, it's not bad, Getting a very, very respectable speed coming up this steep incline, and I'm looking. This is where the 5 degrees of gun depression is not quite enough. I have to get slightly further forward than I would like in order to be able to get the gun down in through the side armour of the T-54 rather than the side of the turret. That enables the Walker Bulldog up there to put a shot into me. And there's the module damage I'm talking about. The first hit that I take, gunner dead. Tank as small as this, all of the modules are going to be packed very, very closely together, which means that it is probably going to take a lot more module damage than the equivalent tier medium or heavy or tank destroyer. So that's something you're probably going to need to bear in mind. Trying to get out of the way, this T-54 lightweight manages to put the final killing shot into the T-54. Now, you'll notice from looking at my equipment setup, cabinet and binoculars, that I have very optimistically and foolishly elected to try to set this thing up as an actual scout tank. On the test server, yeah. Right. However, foolish though that decision may have been, I would have been far better off on the test server sticking a gun rammer and a vertical stabiliser on it. For evaluating how this thing will do in the real world, you know, on the live server, right at this point, after I put a shot into this fleeing Spypanzer, you're going to see that it's not actually a bad idea. When I get around the corner here, we start shooting at the ridge campers. 400 metre view range with binoculars and a camo net means that this Super Pershing and that IS-6 have absolutely no chance of spotting me, and I am easily able to keep putting fire into them. Now, at this range, 430 metres shooting at an IS-6 with standard 90mm ammunition, I'm only really going to penetrate in one shot out of every 4, but I can keep them tracked. If I was firing high explosive anti-tank ammunition, I would be doing a lot of damage to this guy, but I'm not, because I want to know how this thing performs when most people, you know, in the configuration that most people are going to be using it on the live server. But then again, you know, it occurs to me, am I just getting locked into old ways of thinking here? Because my opinions of how light tanks should be driven have largely been formed by the fact that I started driving tank destroyers, medium tanks, and heavy tanks long before I really started getting into light tanks. So I'm still kind of locked into that way of thinking that light tanks should be scouts. And these tanks can scout, but that doesn't mean they are scouts. And it raises the question, you know, should we be thinking of scout as a role rather than a class? Because anybody can scout. Batchats, T-62As, you know, good, fast, low-profile, medium tanks can scout. Hell, I've seen people scouting in KV-5s. Just because these tanks can scout, it doesn't mean that you have to play them as scout tanks. Particularly when you come to look at a tank like the T-54 lightweight, which is actually a better Tier 8 medium tank than the T-44. These are not necessarily scout tanks, and perhaps we've been locked into that way of thinking for too long. Setting this thing up with a camo net and binoculars is me thinking, you know, it's a Tier 8 light tank, I must scout for the Tier 9s and 10s. Yeah, you can do that, but it doesn't mean you have to. And this is something that particularly AMX 1390 drivers have been saying for a long, long time. Just because I'm a light tank doesn't mean I'm a scout. And people have a lot of success driving tanks like the AMX 1390 as a fast attack tank, like a mini Batchat. And that's the thing about, you know, playing these things on the test server, because so many other people are driving these tiny little light tanks. You pretty much don't have any opportunity to do anything other than play them as fast light attack tanks. And yes, we did just win by capping there. Seriously, people are capping on the test server. Because that's how winners test new tanks. They drive them straight into the enemy flag circle and then sit there for a minute. Oh, world of tanks. You so silly. Anyway, second replay of the preview. This is Gunrunner from the EU server. He's playing the Spypanzer in Muravanka. And this is your typical test server matchmaking. Hordes and hordes and hordes of all of these new light tanks. Most particularly the T-49, of course, with that 152mm derp gun. And this replay is going to demonstrate a couple of things. The fantastic power to weight ratio of this little tank. Just how dangerous these little things can be when they get in close to an enemy. And how camping at the back in the woods, here in what used to be the magic forest of Muravanka, is just a losing proposition. And I must admit, I was very pleased watching this replay to see how the battles here on the new Muravanka seem to be panning out more or less the way I predicted. All of the fighting, nobody's fighting it out in the middle of the map. All of the fighting is taking place at the far east and the far west. And here they go. Almost exactly where I said all the fighting was going to take place over here is where all the fighting is taking place. And yes, he did just get shot at by another Spypanzer, and all it did was blow his tracks off. Now, the enemy team are heavily outnumbered in the middle here, but they wouldn't be if half their team wasn't camping at the back, and they just don't have shots because of the low ground in between these ridge lines that's just denying all of these campers at the back shots at the enemy tanks until they've already dealt with the guys that came to fight it out in the middle, and it's just too late. RU-251 there, another Spypanzer who's just about to get completely vaporized by volley fire from various different T-49s. And there's another one camping at the back. Far too late, far too exposed. The second he opens fire, everybody spots him, and he's too late to have any effect on what happened. No, they've completely lost the eastern side of the map now. Enemy team are losing 6-0 because they camped at the back in the woods. It doesn't win games anymore. You've got to get in there, you've got to fight. Now, putting the speed of this thing to use, zooming across the middle. That's pretty much all of them are. Oh no, there's another camper at the back there, just been lit up by a couple of other light tanks. Now, going to get stuck in on some of these heavies. T-34 and an STI. You almost feel sorry for a T-34 driver in these kind of circumstances. He has one shot, and he messes that up. And this 90mm gun fires nearly 10 rounds per minute, and you know how long the reload is on a T-34. He's got no chance, not against all these little tanks. He is doomed. Now, he's going up now against the STI. Now watch this. His gun is going to have problems penetrating the armour of this thing. But just keep an eye, and he should probably be switching to his high explosive anti-tank ammo at this point. But just watch this. He's actually circling this guy backwards, and he still has the engine power and is quick enough to beat the turret rotation of the STI, driving this tank backwards. The power to weight ratio on this little thing is what makes it such a dangerous little tank when it gets in close to an enemy heavy. And that's one of the reasons why I'm asking myself the question, you know, are these really scout tanks? Yes, of course they can scout, but are you just wasting the potential of these little machines if scouting is all you use them for? And I think that this is going to be the sort of thing that differentiates an average new Tier 8 light tank driver from a really good new Tier 8 light tank driver, knowing when, as you know, French autoloader drivers have been saying forever, knowing when is the time to scout and when is the time to leap out from the bushes and start savaging the wounded heavies. Chaffee drivers know exactly what I'm talking about. If there's any justice in the world, these tanks will change the way people think about playing light tanks, or even if they're not playing light tanks themselves, about what the use of a light tank on their team in a high tier battle is. It's not necessarily just for sitting in a bush and spotting the enemies. And aside from that, I mean, you know just how annoying a good AMX 1390 driver can be when he's cruising the ridgeline in the middle of Prokhorovka and lighting up your own team without taking a single hit. These tanks can do all of that, and so much more. So, to summarise the RU-251 Spypanzer, I like this tank. I think it's a really, really good little Tier 8 light tank. I like the fact that there's any number of different ways you can play it and be successful. You can play it as a passive scout. It's got the speed to get up there into what little concealment remains on the maps in World of Tanks when the Wargaming Deforestation Department have been through with them, and passively spot the enemy team. I like the fact that it's fast enough, more than fast enough, and manoeuvrable enough to active scouts in maps like Prokhorovka, working the centre ridgeline of the big field, for example. And I also like the fact that it's got the punch to pose a serious threat to wounded heavies late in the stages of a game. But I also like the fact that it has absolutely no armor, and judiciously well-placed high explosive shots are absolutely going to wreck this little thing because that balances it. It's not overpowered. I think that the T49 is going to be a more popular tank because 152mm howitzer, and I think the majority of players are going to be going for the T49, but I think the really good players are probably going to be going for the RU-251. Hope you enjoyed the preview, folks. As always, take care on that battlefield, and I'll catch you next time.